The courtroom was in chaos. Van Terry, a grieving father, had just lunged at the man who murdered his daughter, screaming in agony and rage. Across the country, a Marine father had beaten his daughter's molester into a bloody pulp, and in Daytona Beach, a father left a predator unconscious after catching him in the act. These raw, visceral moments of parents attacking predators in courtrooms have captivated the nation, revealing the depths of parental fury and the lengths they'll go to for justice. What drives these parents to the brink? And can we truly blame them? The Dmer Trial Outburst.
I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. Thank you, Your Honor, and I am prepared for your sentence, which I know will be the maximum. I ask for no consideration.
Picture this. The Milwaukee County Courthouse is packed. It's 1992, and Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, is on trial. The atmosphere is electric, tense. You could cut the tension with a knife. Family members of the victims are there, journalists, curious onlookers, all gathered to witness justice being served. The air is thick with anticipation and grief.
I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick.
Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't just a murderer. He was a monster in every sense of the word. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer brutally killed 17 young men and boys, mostly in Milwaukee. His victims were often vulnerable, marginalized, and desperate for some kindness, exactly what Dahmer pretended to offer before he lured them to their deaths. Dahmer's methods were beyond gruesome. He didn't just kill, he tortured, mutilated, and even consumed parts of his victims. He preserved body parts as sick trophies. His youngest victim was just 14 years old, Connor Synthasymphone, a Laotian boy whom Dahmer promised money and friendship. Instead, Connor met a horrific end in Dahmer's apartment.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan. I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control.
One of the most unforgettable moments of the trial was Rita Isbell's explosive outburst. Rita was Errol Lindsay's sister, one of Dahmer's victims. Errol was only 19 when Dahmer killed him. During the victim impact statements, Rita approached the podium. She started off composed, but the weight of her grief and rage soon took over. My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you're out of control, she screamed, her voice trembling with fury. Her pain was palpable. She charged at Dahmer, screaming, "Jeffrey, I hate you." Court officers had to restrain her and escort her out, but the damage was done. The courtroom had felt her pain, her anger, her heartbreak.
I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you.
Rita's statement was more than just words. It was a raw, visceral expression of a family's unbearable grief. She later explained in an interview that her outburst was not just for her, but for her entire family. They'd all been holding in their pain, trying to stay composed while facing the man who had destroyed their lives. What Rita did in that courtroom was what her brother Errol would have done if he had been alive, she said. Rita's outburst was a moment of truth, a rare instance where the court's sterile environment was pierced by genuine, unfiltered human emotion.
What was he trying to do?
Like he was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point.
He said he was going to eat your heart?
Yes, that's correct.
The impact of Dahmer's crimes on the families of his victims was immeasurable. Each family was left to grapple with a unique and devastating loss. The broader community in Milwaukee was also deeply affected. Fear and mistrust spread as people realized that a predator had been living among them for years. The trial was a harsh reminder of the evil that can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary facade. Dahmer's gruesome actions not only stole lives, but shattered the sense of security for an entire community. The emotional and psychological scars left by his crimes are still felt today. The Daytona Beach beating.
My emergency is I just walked in and found a grown man molesting, and I got him in a bloody puddle for you right now, officer.
In Daytona Beach, Florida, the case of Raymond Frolander made international headlines for its shocking and visceral details. Frolander, an 18-year-old, was charged with lewd and lascivious molestation of an 11-year-old boy. The betrayal was immense, as Frolander was not a stranger, but someone the boy's family had trusted and treated like one of their own. This trust made the crime all the more heinous. The horror unfolded when the boy's father walked in on Frolander sexually abusing his son. The father's reaction was immediate and violent. Fueled by a combination of rage, betrayal, and a primal urge to protect his child, he severely beat Frolander, leaving him unconscious and bloodied. When he called 911, the father's voice was calm but filled with an underlying fury. "My emergency is I just walked in and found a grown man molesting my son, and I got him in a bloody puddle for you right now, officer," he said. When asked if any weapons were involved, his chilling reply was, "My foot and my fist."
Okay, you got help on the way, okay?
I appreciate it, sir.
All right, do not hang up with me. Stay on the phone with me until police get there. Were there any weapons involved?
My fist and my foot?
In court, Frolander appeared beaten and bruised, his mugshot showing the extent of the father's wrath. He wore an orange jumpsuit and responded to the judge's questions with a calm "yes, ma'am," showing no emotion. Frolander pleaded no contest to the charges, which could have carried a life sentence. As part of a plea deal, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Upon his release, he'll be registered as a sexual predator and will be on sex offender probation with electronic monitoring for the rest of his life. The courtroom was tense, with the victim's family present but choosing not to testify, possibly to spare the boy from further trauma. After the sentencing, the father made a brief but powerful statement to reporters. He's going to learn in the next 25 years why I let him live. This statement encapsulated the raw emotion and the depth of the father's protective instincts. It also highlighted a sentiment that many parents can understand but few ever have to confront so directly: the urge to take justice into their own hands when their child's safety is at stake. The moral and legal implications of the father's actions sparked widespread debate. On one hand, his violent response was a clear act of vigilante justice, a physical manifestation of his outrage and need to protect his child. Legally, however, his actions could have led to serious consequences. Assault, even in the defense of a child, is still a crime. Yet, in this case, no charges were filed against the father, reflecting a societal understanding, if not an outright endorsement, of his reaction. Public reaction was largely supportive of the father. Many people viewed his actions as justified, a necessary and immediate response to an unforgivable betrayal. The image of a father defending his son against a predator struck a chord, evoking deep-seated instincts about family and protection. However, this support also raises important questions about the limits of justice and the role of the legal system. While the father's actions were understandable, they also bypassed the legal process designed to handle such crimes. This case underscores the tension between legal justice and personal vengeance, highlighting the complexities involved when the two collide. The Emotional Outburst in East Cleveland. In East Cleveland, Ohio, the trial of Michael Madison for the murder of 3 women was a grim and emotionally charged affair. Madison, a convicted serial killer and sex offender, had brutally murdered Sherelda Terry, Shatisha Shealy, and Angela Deskins over a period spanning 2012 and 2013. His crimes sent shockwaves through the community, leaving an indelible mark on the victims' families and the broader public. Michael Madison's modus operandi was chillingly methodical. He lured his victims, tortured them, and then discarded their bodies like garbage, wrapping them in plastic bags. Sherelda Terry, only 18 years old, was the youngest of his victims. She was last seen leaving a summer job, her bright future cruelly snatched away by Madison's depravity. Shatisha Shealy and Angela Deskins, both in their late 20s, met similar fates, their lives cut short in acts of senseless violence. Madison showed no remorse throughout his trial, maintaining a cold and detached demeanor that only intensified the pain and anger felt by the victims' families. The courtroom became the epicenter of this pent-up grief and rage. On the day of Madison's sentencing, family members of the victims were given the chance to deliver their victim impact statements. Van Terry, the father of Sherelda Terry, stood before the court, his voice trembling with emotion. He'd barely begun to speak when the raw intensity of his grief and anger overcame him. In an explosive and unforgettable moment, Van Terry lunged at Michael Madison, attempting to physically attack the man who had murdered his daughter. "I guess we're supposed to find it in our hearts to forgive this clown who touched our families, taking my child," Terry shouted as he was restrained by court officers. The courtroom erupted in chaos. a visceral display of the unbearable pain carried by the victims' families. Madison's lack of remorse was palpable throughout the trial. He sat impassively, showing no signs of guilt or regret for his heinous actions. This cold detachment only served to heighten the emotional intensity in the courtroom, as family members struggled to reconcile the magnitude of their loss with the killer's indifference. For the families, the trial was not just about seeking justice, but also about confronting the man who had brought unimaginable sorrow into their lives. The emotional toll on the victims' families was immense. The trial was a constant reminder of their loved ones' suffering and the brutal end they met at Madison's hands. Van Terry's outburst was not just an act of anger. It was the manifestation of years of grief, frustration, and the desperate need for some semblance of justice. His reaction underscored the human capacity for grief and the breaking point that comes when that grief is coupled with a sense of helplessness. The broader community also felt the impact of Madison's crimes. East Cleveland was gripped by fear and anger, with many residents struggling to comprehend how such evil could exist in their midst. The trial, while providing a forum for justice, also highlighted the deep scars left by Madison's actions. It brought to light the limitations of the legal system in addressing the emotional and psychological needs of the victims' families. While the court could sentence Madison to life in prison, it could not heal the wounds inflicted by his crimes. In analyzing the emotional toll on the victims' families, it becomes clear that the legal process, while necessary, often falls short in addressing the full spectrum of human suffering. Van Terry's outburst was a stark reminder that behind every court case are real people grappling with profound loss. The grief-stricken reactions of the victims' families highlight the need for a more compassionate approach to justice, one that acknowledges and addresses the emotional realities faced by those left behind. The infamous Larry Nassar case.
You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system works.
The case of Larry Nassar is one of the most infamous examples of abuse within the sports community, casting a long shadow over the world of gymnastics. For nearly 2 decades, Nassar, a once respected sports medicine physician and team doctor for the United States women's national gymnastics team, preyed on young athletes under the guise of medical treatment. His position of authority and trust allowed him to commit heinous acts of sexual abuse to over 265 women and girls, shattering lives and exposing systemic failures within institutions like USA Gymnastics and Michigan State University. The true extent of Nassar's abuse came to light in 2016, when brave survivors began to step forward, sharing their harrowing stories. These young women, who had once trusted Nassar implicitly, revealed that he had exploited his role to sexually assault them during supposed medical exams. The sheer number of victims and the duration of the abuse were staggering, highlighting how deeply Nassar's predatory behavior had been embedded within the gymnastics community.
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon. Would you do that?
That is not how
yes
our...
or no?
No, sir, I can't.
Would you give me
that.
1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system...
One of the most dramatic moments during Nassar's trial occurred on January 25, 2018, during a sentencing hearing in Ingham County Circuit Court. Randall Margraves, a father of 3 of Nassar's victims, stood before the court to deliver his victim impact statement. The raw pain and anger in his voice were palpable as he spoke about the abuse his daughters had endured. Overcome with emotion, Margraves made an impulsive request to the judge. "I would ask you to, as part of the sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon." When the judge, Rosemarie Aquilina, denied his request, Margraves lunged at Nassar, attempting to attack him. The courtroom erupted into chaos as security officers wrestled Margraves to the ground and restrained him. The reaction in the courtroom was a mix of shock and empathy. Many people understood Margraves' fury and desperation. His outburst was a raw expression of the grief and rage that countless parents and survivors felt towards Nassar. The judge decided not to charge Margraves with contempt of court, recognizing the depth of his anguish and the extraordinary circumstances. In the aftermath of Margraves' outburst, Nassar's sentencing proceeded. On January 24, 2018, Nassar was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison for his crimes. This sentence was in addition to a previous 60-year federal prison sentence for child pornography charges. Judge Aquilina's words during sentencing echoed the sentiments of many. "I just signed your death warrant." Her statement underscored the severity of Nassar's crimes and the judicial system's recognition of the immense harm he had caused. The The public reaction to Nassar's sentencing and Margrave's outburst was overwhelmingly supportive of the survivors and their families. Many saw Margrave's actions as an understandable, albeit extreme, response to the profound betrayal and suffering inflicted by Nassar. His attempt to physically attack Nassar was seen as a manifestation of the deep-seated desire for immediate justice, something many felt the legal system, despite its best efforts, could never fully deliver. The case of Larry Nassar forces us to examine the limits of patience and the desire for immediate justice in the face of unspeakable crimes. While the legal process is designed to ensure fairness and due process, it often feels slow and insufficient to those who've been directly harmed. The emotional toll on survivors and their families is immense, and the desire for swift retribution can be overwhelming. Margrave's outburst highlighted the frustration many feel with the legal system's inability to provide a sense of immediate closure or satisfaction. In analyzing the limits of patience and the quest for justice, it is clear that the Nassar case represents more than just the punishment of one man. It reflects the broader societal need for accountability, transparency, and support for survivors of abuse. The courtroom drama, the emotional testimonies, and the public outrage all underscore a critical truth. Justice is not just about sentencing. It's about acknowledging the pain of survivors, holding perpetrators accountable, and ensuring that such widespread abuse can never happen again. The vigilante prison justice. In the dark and often violent world of prison, justice sometimes takes a form that strays far from the courtroom. This was starkly illustrated in the case of Stephen Sanderson, a man serving a life sentence for the 1991 murder of his girlfriend. Sanderson's life behind bars took a notorious turn when he made the decision to kill his cellmate, Theodore Dyer, a convicted child molester. Dyer was serving time for sexually assaulting a child under the age of 13, a crime that placed him at the bottom of the prison hierarchy. Sanderson's decision to kill Dyer was driven by a twisted sense of justice. In a chilling confession to Michigan State Police detectives Gary Thomas and Patrick Darrow, Sanderson detailed the events leading up to and following Dyer's death. He admitted to strangling Dyer with his own shoelaces just 12 hours after the two had become cellmates. Sanderson's reasoning was disturbingly straightforward. "I killed him because he was a child molester." He didn't mince words or show any hint of remorse. In fact, Sanderson's demeanor during the confession was almost casual, as if he believed his actions were not only justified but necessary. "Some people deserve to die for what they've done," he stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. The public reaction to Sanderson's crime was polarized. On one hand, there was a significant portion of society that viewed him as a hero. Inmates who commit crimes against children are often seen as the lowest of the low, even among other prisoners. This societal disdain for child molesters led many to see Sanderson's actions as a form of righteous retribution. Social media was abuzz with people praising Sanderson, hailing him as a vigilante who delivered the justice the legal system couldn't or wouldn't. Comments and posts ranged from calling him a hero to saying that he did what needed to be done. However, the law took a different stance. Despite the public's sympathetic view, Sanderson's actions were still murder. The legal system, designed to maintain order and uphold the law impartially, cannot condone vigilante justice. While many might understand Sanderson's motives, the fact remains that he took a life, which is a crime in itself, regardless of the victim's background. This dichotomy between public opinion and legal principles highlights a complex moral dilemma. Where does justice end and revenge begin? The phenomenon of prison justice, especially in cases involving crimes against children, raises significant questions about the nature of justice itself. In prison, inmates convicted of harming children often face brutal retaliation from their fellow inmates. This form of extrajudicial punishment reflects a societal view that certain crimes are so heinous they warrant immediate and severe retribution. The visceral reaction to child molesters is deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness, often leading to a harsh, albeit unofficial, form of justice within the prison walls. Yet this form of justice is fraught with ethical and legal issues. While it may provide a sense of immediate retribution, it bypasses the structured legal system designed to deliver justice fairly and without bias. It also perpetuates a cycle of violence, undermining the principles of rehabilitation and lawful conduct that the prison system is supposed to uphold. Sanderson's case, in particular, underscores the thin line between justice and vigilantism, and the complicated feelings society harbors towards those who harm the most vulnerable among us. Revenge after decades of silence. Clark Fredericks endured a childhood marred by trauma and abuse. suffering in silence for decades before he finally confronted his abuser, Dennis Pegg. Pegg, a trusted family friend and Boy Scout leader, sexually abused Fredericks from the age of 8 until he was 12. The betrayal was deep, and the scars left by Pegg's heinous acts were both emotional and psychological, haunting Fredericks well into adulthood. For years, Fredericks suppressed the horrific memories, but the past has a way of catching up. On June 12, 2012, fueled by a mix of alcohol and cocaine, Fredericks reached his breaking point. Seeing Pegg with another young boy triggered a flood of traumatic memories. Fredericks, convinced that Pegg was likely abusing this boy as well, decided he could no longer remain silent. He, along with his friend Robert Reynolds, confronted Pegg in his home. The confrontation quickly escalated into violence. In a fit of rage, Fredericks stabbed Pegg repeatedly, shouting, "How does it feel raping little kids now?" The murder of Dennis Pegg was not just an act of revenge, it was an explosive release of years of pent-up anger and pain. Fredericks later recounted that he saw flashes of his own childhood as he confronted Pegg, each stab representing the countless times he felt powerless and violated. It was a brutal and bloody act, one that left Pegg dead and Fredericks covered in his abuser's blood. The courtroom drama that ensued was gripping. Fredericks was initially charged with first-degree murder, but as the details of his past abuse emerged, the case took on a different tone. During the trial, Fredericks gave a harrowing testimony about the years of sexual abuse he'd endured at the hands of Pegg. His emotional account was corroborated by character witnesses and psychological evaluations that highlighted the severe impact the abuse had on his mental health. The courtroom was a battleground of raw emotion. Prosecutors argued that regardless of the abuse, Fredericks had committed murder and needed to be held accountable. The defense, however, painted a picture of a man pushed to the edge by years of unaddressed trauma. They argued that Fredericks' actions, while violent and extreme, were a direct result of the abuse he suffered. The jury was visibly moved by Fredericks' testimony, and many in the courtroom could empathize with his plight. Ready for more chilling courtroom videos? Subscribe to keep up with the latest from Court Uncovered.